Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. They drained my lake behind my back, killed the land my father built with his bare hands. Thought I'd just stand there while they toasted champagne over my stolen water. They forgot one thing: I still control the flow, and now their mansions are sinking. Let's begin. The hum of the wind through the cottonwoods was the only sound I heard as I walked the perimeter of the lake that had been in my family for generations. 13 acres of still, reflective water stretched out in front of me like a piece of heaven carved into the earth. My boots crunched on the gravel path my father laid back in the 70s. The air smelled like pine, wet stone, and that faint metallic tinge lakes sometimes carry when they've been undisturbed for years. I paused near the old spillway, rusted but intact, and looked down at the concrete structure my dad built with his own crew. Army Corps certified, back when he was still designing dams for the federal government. My name's Grayson Stanton. I'm 45, former combat hydrologist with the Corps of Engineers, now owner and caretaker of a private wildlife preserve outside Cody, Wyoming. The land, the dam, the lake, all of it deeded, documented, and legally mine. I inherited it 5 years ago after my father passed, and I've spent every season since restoring it, maintaining the floodgates, clearing silt, and protecting the migratory birds and marshland species that depend on it. It's not just a lake to me, it's a legacy, and lately it's also become a target. Across the water, tucked along the northern bank, sat a string of 11 glistening white and glass mansions, part of a new luxury development called Silver Dunes Estates. HOA governed naturally. When they first broke ground 3 years ago, I kept my distance. It wasn't my business what kind of fortresses people built, as long as they stayed out of mine. The HOA sent me a letter that first winter offering a cooperative agreement. They wanted shared access to the water line. I politely declined. The lake wasn't a shared amenity. It was a private, self-sustained ecosystem, but they didn't stop. A woman named Karen Remington introduced herself at a community planning meeting 2 years ago. Bold, stiff-lipped, always dressed like she was 10 minutes from a TV interview. She made it clear she was the HOA president and that she represented the interests of the lake's concerned neighbors. I told her, as I told the others, that the lake was not their concern. They used it anyway. Canoes would drift out some weekends. I'd find paddleboards tied up on my side. Lights glowed across the surface at night. I posted signs. They disappeared. I had a lawyer send a cease and desist letter to the HOA. No reply. Then the drone started. Little quadcopters buzzing over the dam and the spillway, always hovering low, slow. Once one dipped to within 20 feet of the emergency gate. I shot that one down. It never came back, but I started noticing others flying higher, out of range. 3 weeks ago, a man showed up at my gate, said his name was Howard Brimley, claimed to be a private engineering consultant representing the district, wore khakis, bad shoes, and tried to flash a laminated badge I could have printed in Microsoft Word. He handed me an envelope and said he was there to perform a dam safety assessment due to community concerns. I opened it on the spot. It was a notice of required inspection signed by a supposed regional engineer. The problem? The name on the form was partially smudged and the formatting was off. I told him politely that the dam was certified, registered as a private hydrological asset under the 1987 Private Water Infrastructure Protection Act, and that no unauthorized inspection was permitted without a warrant or federal directive. He smiled like he expected that answer and walked off without protest. That alone raised red flags. 2 days later, I heard from a retired colleague of mine who used to work at the State Water Resource Board. He asked if I'd seen the complaint filed by Silver Dunes HOA to the county. I hadn't. Turns out, Karen and her board had filed a formal declaration asserting that my dam, my federally documented, routinely maintained, professionally certified dam, posed a high risk of spontaneous failure. They claimed that if it breached, the entirety of Silver Dunes estates would be catastrophically affected. They'd submitted aerial photos, independent reports from 2 engineers, one of whom turned out to be Karen's nephew, and even a mock-up of what the neighborhood would look like if the lake wall gave out. They called it proactive environmental safety. I called it exactly what it was, a targeted assault on private land for their own gain. That afternoon, I stood in my boathouse, combing through the blueprints my father sketched by hand back in 1956. Every measurement, every hydrodynamic calculation, still valid. I checked the inspection logs from last year's maintenance sweep. No issues. Nothing even close to structural risk. But this wasn't about facts. This was about perception. And something told me the HOA wasn't finished yet, so I activated my external trail cams. I checked the dam sensors. I backed up the drone footage I had of Karen's guests paddling over the water without permission. And I called my attorney, because something was coming. And I wasn't about to let it happen without a fight. I woke up to the sound of wind rattling the pine trees and the familiar creak of the cabin settling on its foundation. For a moment, everything felt normal, peaceful, but something tugged at me, a gut-level sense that something was off. I threw on jeans and boots, grabbed a thermos of coffee, and stepped out onto the porch. The view that met me stopped me cold. The lake was lower, noticeably. I walked down to the shoreline, heart already thumping. The canoe I had tied up just 2 days ago was now grounded on cracked, drying mud. The waterline had dropped at least 2 feet, maybe more, in just 24 hours. That wasn't evaporation. That wasn't a clogged inlet. That was active drainage. I sprinted down the path to the dam. At the base, I saw it immediately. The emergency spillway gate was open, and not just cracked, fully cranked open. Water gushed through the exposed metal sluice in a roaring torrent, carving down into the bypass channel that fed into the canyon below. The pressure was tearing at the old concrete lip of the chute, and every second it flowed, thousands of gallons vanished. I cursed, dropped my thermos, and ran to the control station. The lock on the gate wheel was missing. Cleanly cut, like someone had used a bolt cutter and taken the pieces with them. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't an accident. This was sabotage. The lock had been intact the day before. I checked it every morning. And no one, absolutely no one, had legal authority to access that gate but me. I shut the spillway manually, muscles burning as I cranked the rust-hardened wheel closed. It took 5 agonizing minutes before the gate finally clanged shut and the gushing slowed to a trickle. I stood there, breath ragged, hands covered in grease and old steel. Then I heard the beeping. I turned. A black utility truck sat at the bottom of the service road near the dam, with the county's seal on the door. A man in a high-vis vest stepped out, clipboard in hand. "Morning," he said, like we were neighbors chatting about the weather. "Just here to inspect the bypass flow. Looks like the release went smoothly." I blinked. "What the hell are you talking about?" He furrowed his brow. "Didn't you receive the notification? The county issued an expedited drainage order yesterday morning. There was a public hazard complaint filed. We were told to release volume to mitigate the flood risk." "On whose authority?" I snapped. He flipped his clipboard around. I scanned the sheet, an emergency order signed by a deputy chief of water safety from the county. Not someone I recognized, and not a signature that matched any of the officials I'd worked with during my Corps days. I wasn't even notified. According to this, the HOA provided photographs of structural concern, the worker said, thumbing through the file. Some aerial shots of buckling concrete, standing water behind the berm, said the potential failure could threaten residential properties. "There is no structural compromise," I said coldly. "This dam is certified under federal protection. You just tampered with it without consulting the owner of record. That's criminal trespass and unauthorized manipulation of water control infrastructure." The worker's posture shifted slightly, and for the first time, I saw the uncertainty creep into his expression. I was told everything was cleared by legal. I'm just following the dispatch." "Who issued the dispatch?" He hesitated. Director Marcellus, Office of Local Environmental Risk." I froze. Marcellus. I knew the name. He'd been flagged 5 years ago in a zoning investigation involving illegal water rights modifications in southern Wyoming. It was buried quietly, no charges, but he'd been transferred out of the Western Basin sector after that. Now he was back, and he'd signed a document that let someone enter my land and drain my lake. I demanded a full copy of the order, badge ID, and the work log. The technician, now visibly uncomfortable, complied. He left quickly, probably realizing that the person on this side of the lake wasn't just some country recluse. I spent the next 6 hours trying to reach someone at the county water office. Voicemails, forwarded calls, dead ends. No one wanted to talk. Finally, an assistant director sent me a single-line email. Per Emergency Order 417C, the lake in question has been classified as a potential flood risk zone pending further investigation. Pending further investigation, meaning the lake stays drained until they decide otherwise. I stood on the dock at sunset, staring out at a cracked bowl of brown silt and tangled reeds where water used to glimmer. The birds were gone, the frogs silent, and across the lake, I saw lights flickering on in the mansions of Silver Dunes. One of them, the largest, had a banner stretched across the porch railings. "Welcome, homeowners." There were cars parked all up the private road. A party. Champagne glasses, music, laughter, HOA flags. I even saw Karen herself clinking glasses with a man in a gray sport coat, the same man I recognized from the online staff directory of the county's Environmental Risk Division. I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles cracked. They had done this. They had drained my lake, murdered the land around it, and turned it into a victory toast. And I was done watching. By Monday morning, the lake was gone. Not reduced, not drained a little, gone. A pale, cracked depression stretched out before me like an open wound in the land, its edges curling with dry algae and dead reeds. The central bed was caked mud, streaked with tire tracks from whatever heavy machinery had been used near the spillway over the weekend. The stench was immediate, a mix of rotting aquatic vegetation, sun-baked silt, and the sour tang of something dying. Birds that once nested in the shallows were gone. A family of blue-winged teals I'd tracked for 4 seasons had vanished. Frogs, the ones that used to sing through the night, were now silent. A half-decayed turtle lay belly up near a dry inlet, its shell split from exposure. I stood knee-deep in loss. I took photos, dozens. Then I launched my drone. The footage showed everything. The skeletal outline of the lake bed, the dam gates sealed shut, the collapsed beds of cattails, the absent heron nests. My preserve had gone from an ecosystem to a dead zone in 72 hours. And across the lake bed, like some cruel theater stage, stood the glassy homes of Silver Dunes. One of them had party balloons still attached to the mailbox. That night, I watched the footage again, but from another perspective. The local news had picked up a positive community story about HOA safety efforts. The clip showed HOA President Karen Remington standing on the deck of her oversized lakefront home, wearing a tailored blue dress and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're just so relieved," she said into the camera. "For years, the threat of flooding was a dark cloud over our neighborhood. Now, thanks to the county's swift response, we can breathe easy." I'd like to personally thank Director Marcellus and the Department of Environmental Risk Management for taking our safety seriously. The camera panned to show a crowd of HOA members clapping, champagne in hand. They had planned a celebration, scheduled it, branded it with a banner, "Silver Dunes, secure and strong." I muted the screen before I threw something at it. There was no mention of me, no acknowledgement that the lake was privately owned, no reference to the permits, the deed, or the legal protections in place for the habitat that had just been destroyed. To them, I didn't exist. My lake had become their problem, then their victory. I spent the next day filing a formal complaint with the State Department of Environmental Quality, attaching photographic evidence, dam documentation, and maps. I cited sections of the Clean Water Act, the Private Infrastructure Protection Act, and relevant clauses on wetland habitat protection. They replied with a boilerplate email. "Your claim has been logged and will be reviewed in accordance with internal prioritization protocols." Internal prioritization. In other words, we'll get to it when we feel like it. I wasn't surprised. The next morning, I drove into town to meet with Cal Bishop, a retired deputy water engineer and an old friend of my father's. Cal had worked for the county for 40 years and knew where the bodies were buried, figuratively speaking. "I heard about what they did," he said grimly, flipping through the binder of documentation I brought. "This is bad, Grayson. Real bad." "You recognize the name?" "Marcellus? Yeah, he's a climber. Slid into that director role after the zoning scandal in Laramie. He's been buddying up to private developers ever since. And Karen Remington, she's in with the real estate lobby. Her husband's firm funds half the local green planning initiatives." Cal leaned back, rubbing his temples. "This wasn't about safety. It was about asset value." "What do you mean?" "They wanted the lake gone, not for protection, for profit." Get rid of the flood risk designation, and these properties go up 20, maybe 30% in appraised value. Insurance premiums drop, mortgage caps get lifted. It's a classic valuation scam. He pulled out his phone and scrolled for a moment before showing me an email, a copy of the HOA's original petition to the county. Somehow, Cal had a leak. The subject line read, Strategic Use Proposal for Lakebed Post-Drainage. Inside, Karen had written, once the lake is drained, the area can be reclassified as Greenbelt or Community Recreation. Residents would support a private dock expansion or sports facility development. No flooding risk. Chitra clean zoning slate. I stared at the screen. That's conspiracy, I said quietly. She didn't just lie, i.e. she planned to repurpose the basin. And with the right people on the board, no one would stop her. I took copies of the emails and wrote down names. Marcellus, Karen Remington, the supposed engineer, Brimley. I was building a list, the same way I used to do it overseas when someone planted an IED and vanished behind a bureaucratic wall. The next few days, I tried everything. I filed an injunction request. Rejected. I submitted an emergency appeal to the local environmental court. Denied, due to insufficient evidence of irreparable harm. Irreparable harm. Apparently a dead lake and a ruined preserve weren't enough. That weekend, I returned to the dam to check the silt levels and noticed something strange. Pools of water collecting near the base of the old access trail. The rain had started up again. And despite the spillway being closed, runoff had started filling the lowlands. The water wasn't returning to the lakebed. It was moving elsewhere. And then I remembered something. Back in 1964, during a seasonal flood, my father rerouted overflow through a secondary drainage system, a trench canal lined with stone and brush, designed to move excess water away from the basin and into the western marshland. A marshland that no longer existed because it had been bulldozed and filled to make room for 5 of the most expensive homes in Silver Dunes Estates. A smile crept onto my face, a cold, calculated one. They wanted the lake gone to protect their mansions. They might have just built those mansions on a floodplain, and I still had full control of the water system, every gate, every culvert, every hidden channel buried beneath the trees. If the county wanted to play games with me, fine. Let's see how they liked it when nature played back. The next morning, I climbed into the loft above the old workshop behind my cabin. The stairs creaked underfoot like they had since I was 10. Dust sparkled in the slats of sunlight that cut through the warped window panes. I pulled down the battered trunk marked GS 1963-76, my father's archive. Inside were maps, rolled blueprints with faded grid lines, ink smudged with time. Not digital scans or city records, but hand-drawn schematics, the kind engineers made when they didn't trust bureaucrats to file things right. And in the bottom of the trunk, sandwiched between a surveyor's ledger and a photograph of my dad in front of the original dam wall, I found what I was looking for. Overflow Contingency Channel, Phase 2. It was a side system designed in 1965 as part of a defensive measure after a flash flood took out 2 culverts in the county north of us. The overflow trench began behind the primary dam and forked off west, down into what was then designated as wetlands, non-buildable. The blueprint showed a 40-inch buried clay-lined sluice under the old alder groves, leading directly toward what today was Silver Dunes Lot 5 through 9. Back then, it was marsh. Now, it was luxury living. And not a single one of those houses had been built with subgrade hydrological review. I checked. The developers claimed grade-stable ground, but they'd filled the marsh with reinforced soil, never bothering to trace the old water channels. The HOA had ignored the flood map overlays because no one thought the lake would ever flood again. After all, they had just drained it, hadn't they? I smiled to myself and rolled the map up slowly. I wasn't going to destroy anything. That wasn't my style, but I was going to use the land the way it was built. First, I closed off the eastern release, the main spillway that fed into the canyon run. I checked the valve, sealed tight. No discharge. Then I examined the diversion gate for the western channel. It hadn't been touched in decades. The rusted lever took an hour of work to loosen, but when it finally shifted, the hiss of air gave way to the deep gurgle of pressure being restored. The system still worked. Beneath the surface, under all the HOA's dreams of manicured perfection, the veins of this land were still connected, and I had the key to every one of them. The rains started 2 days later. Not heavy at first. Just a steady spring pattern, nothing unusual for Wyoming. But with the dam gates closed and the western channel slowly drawing water from the replenishing water table and hill runoff, saturation began. I installed trail cams near the foothills and along the canal entry point, motion sensors, thermal readers. I knew what to watch for: gradual seep, not flooding, the kind of wetness that builds underneath foundations before anyone notices. By Friday, Lot 7 had a soft patch on the far edge of its lawn. By Sunday, the lawn crew refused to mow it. On Monday, the owner filed a complaint about drainage irregularities. That night, I walked the perimeter in silence, the sound of frogs slowly returning to the upper banks. Nature was doing what it always did, remembering. I'd done nothing illegal. I hadn't tampered with anyone's pipes. I hadn't broken a single statute. I had simply reactivated a legacy system, one the HOA had ignored when they poured millions into their golf course front palaces. Then, just as I hoped, they panicked. Emails started flying in the HOA's internal chain. I'd been monitoring it via a leaked thread Cal managed to keep feeding me. Foundation shift detected on Lot 9. Inspection ordered. Insurance flagged soil instability under primary structure. Are we sure the lake basin won't refill? Why is the ground wetter than projected? Karen tried to calm them with a statement. There is no structural threat. We are investigating natural weather conditions. This is not related to the prior lakebed modifications. They still believed they were in control, but the land knew otherwise. I visited the dam every day, checking water levels, keeping logs, calibrating pressure gauges. I uploaded the readings to a secure server with timestamps. I wasn't just staging a response. I was building an evidentiary shield. If they accused me of tampering, I'd show them the historic blueprints, the rainfall data, the soil charts, and the unbroken chain of dam ownership and maintenance. This was no act of revenge. This was hydrological reversion. Let the rain fall. Let the runoff flow. Let the land become what it was before greed paved over it. Then came the kicker. An email surfaced in the HOA's own chain, forwarded by a disgruntled resident who'd grown tired of Karen's assurances. Subject line: funding opportunity, proposed community center site plan. Karen had proposed post-drainage to repurpose the dry lake bed into a private sports complex featuring a boathouse-themed clubhouse, running trails, and even a pier and built on my land. In her proposal to the board, she wrote, "The former lake is no longer a concern. If we move quickly, we can build before the county reconsiders zoning updates. This is a long-term equity play." She'd planned it all. Not just the removal of the lake, but the seizure of the land beneath it, hoping that once the water was gone long enough, I'd lose jurisdiction, or the county would try to reclassify it as a shared zone. That was her endgame. And now? Her endgame was getting mold spores in her basement. I called Cal. "Start printing the emails," I said. "All of them. Chain of intent, documents, the proposal, Marcellus's signature on the release order, everything. You going to file now?" "Not yet," I replied, staring at the pooling water under a Silver Dunes retaining wall from 400 yards away. "And let it get just a little wetter first." The rains didn't stop. What had begun as a soft, persistent drizzle evolved into a steady spring soak. Not a downpour, not a flood, but the kind of relentless mountain moisture that saturated the land day after day. I watched it collect along the old stone trench my father dug 60 years ago, the water moving with a quiet inevitability, bypassing the dead lake bed and settling in the exact place Karen's HOA least expected, under their dreams. By Wednesday, I received word through Cal that 2 homes had reported standing water in their crawl spaces. Lot 6 had a warped garage floor. Lot 9 had mushrooms sprouting in the carpeted basement. Emails from the HOA board grew more frantic by the hour. Demands for municipal inspection, complaints to insurance, whispers of suing the county. I just kept monitoring the flow, logging it, charting every inch. They still hadn't realized the water was coming from my system. They thought they'd solved the lake, that draining it had neutralized the threat. But they didn't understand the land the way my father did. They didn't know about the sponge layers under the western edge, or the way snowmelt saturated from above and below, especially when the primary channel was closed and the overflow sluice was open. They didn't know the dam wasn't their enemy. The soil was. And the soil remembered. I made sure to keep my distance during the next few days. I wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of some confrontation or an excuse to claim harassment. I spent my time collecting more evidence: drone footage, sensor readings, soil core samples. Cal connected me with an old contact at the Wyoming Geological Services, a woman named Dr. Callie Wren, who agreed to give an independent analysis off the record. Her verdict: the HOA construction is sitting on disturbed land. It was a wetland. You can't compress nature under decorative concrete and expect it to stay dry. Could this be traced to runoff? I asked. She gave me a tight smile. If someone were, say, redirecting historical runoff channels? Absolutely. Especially if you had records showing the original flow path. And it looks like you do. She sent me a notarized memo marked preliminary assessment. I filed it, and then came the next card. A notice was pinned to my front gate. Not mailed, not served, but stapled crudely to the wooden post like some backwoods warning. Notice of code violation, unlicensed waterworks activity, issued by the Silver Dunes HOA Compliance Committee. I laughed out loud. Not the light kind. The dry, brittle sort that comes when someone crosses a line so bold, it's almost impressive. They had the gall to try and cite me. On my land. Citing unauthorized hydrological adjustments affecting adjacent community property, signed by Karen herself. I scanned it, stamped it void in red, and drove to town. That afternoon, I walked into the county recorder's office with a binder in one hand and a hard drive in the other. I requested a formal land hearing and filed a preliminary suit for trespass via bureaucratic abuse, attaching all my documentation, drone footage, photos, water rights, and the entire communication chain between Karen and County Director Marcellus. The clerk raised her eyebrows as she flipped through the binder. "This is extensive," she murmured. "It'll get more extensive," I said. "By the time I'm done, I'll have a full forensic review of every illegal action taken by the HOA, including their attempt to drain a certified private lake without legal notice." I left the building without looking back. That night, the real kicker came. One of the trail cams I'd installed in the old grove, facing toward the now swamped edge of Silver Dunes, caught motion just after 11:30 p.m. A hooded figure, flashlight, moving toward one of the runoff gates. They tried to sabotage it. I reviewed the footage 10 times. They used a crowbar, tried to wedge the metal grate loose. Probably thought if they busted the gate, the runoff would stop. But they had no clue how the system worked. No idea that the pressure came from higher elevation, that the water would simply find another outlet. The camera caught the face clearly as the hood slipped back. Karen, in boots covered in mud, swearing under her breath as she struggled with the grate. I called Cal at 6 a.m. "Get this into the chain of evidence. She's not just negligent. She's tampering with a certified hydrological system." "I'm on it," he said. "Also, you should see this." He forwarded a copy of an email from the county's Ethics Commission. They were launching an inquiry into Director Marcellus based on an anonymous complaint, which I had definitely not sent. But someone had. Someone inside, maybe a fed-up county worker, maybe one of the engineers forced to sign off on the drainage order. Didn't matter. The dominoes were falling, and I wasn't done. I printed the still of Karen tampering with the grate and laminated it. Then I posted it at the base of the trail where the HOA could see it, captioned in bold red marker, "This is what fraud looks like. Let the land decide." They wanted a war? They were standing on the battlefield, and it was getting wetter by the hour. By the start of the next week, the word was out. Not just inside Silver Dunes, it had spread into town. Contractors, realtors, even county planners were murmuring about the sinking mansions out near Old Stanton Lake. That's what they were calling it again, Stanton Lake. Not the former lake, not the redevelopment zone. My father's name was back on people's lips, and not just out of nostalgia, because something was visibly wrong. Driveways at Lot 6 and 8 had started to bow. Retaining walls were pulling away from soil. Gutters sagged. Tree roots, long dormant beneath the artificial lawn grids, had started rising again, shifting under stress. And through it all, Karen tried to spin the story as an unseasonably wet spring. I didn't have to speak. The ground spoke for me. but I wasn't finished. I filed a formal motion with the Wyoming State Environmental Review Board, citing unlawful ecological disruption, unauthorized modification of a natural habitat, and destruction of protected avian nesting zones. I included satellite imagery showing the loss of green cover, drone footage of the drain lake, and cross-referenced it all with my late father's registered documents, including the federal certificate designating the area as regulated hydrological terrain. Within 48 hours, I received confirmation. Emergency review scheduled. State agents will arrive within 5 business days. Karen must have found out because that same night, her board sent out a community-wide email claiming the flooding was caused by faulty drainage pipes installed by the previous developer. The email ended with a warning: do not engage with the property owner across the lake. He is under investigation for tampering with water systems. Classic projection. I printed that email too. Meanwhile, Cal reached out with another update. Apparently, 2 families from Silver Dunes had filed early insurance inquiries after discovering black mold in their crawl spaces. The companies weren't happy, especially when the adjusters traced the property records and found the homes were built on formerly unsuitable floodplain, which had never been properly reclassified. In short, their policies might not cover water damage at all. Karen's golden facade was cracking, and so was the literal ground beneath her. I hiked to the overlook near the channel's western runoff late that evening, just before sunset. From there, I could see the shimmer of water pooling in the basin. Not enough to call it a lake yet, but more than just a marsh. The earth was reclaiming what was stolen from it. And me? I just stood quietly, arms crossed, listening to the wind shift across the wet grass. A message arrived on my phone just as I was about to head back. It was from Cal. One line: "You're going to want to see what I found in the zoning archives." Sending PDF now, and as I opened the file, my jaw tightened. There it was, a scanned document dated 3 years prior, signed by Karen Remington herself, petitioning the county to rezone the land under the lakebed into community development and recreation area, effective upon deactivation of the lake. Reservoir system. It was premeditated. She didn't just want to drain the lake. She planned to steal the land under it once it dried. Now I had proof. Not speculation, not rumor, a paper trail. And the swamp she'd created? It was swallowing her entire plan alive. The morning after Cal sent me the zoning document, I printed 3 copies. One for my lawyer, one for the State Environmental Board, and one that I personally drove over to the county courthouse. There was no hesitation now, no benefit of the doubt. This wasn't just a hostile HOA acting out of ignorance. It was a pre-planned land grab, a scheme built on fraudulent risk reports, bribed officials, and a dream of turning my lakebed into their private tennis courts. But nature had other plans. By Thursday, the situation at Silver Dunes crossed from problematic into disaster. 3 basements had flooded. 1 home had raw sewage backing up because the subgrade septic field couldn't function under standing water. Emergency crews were called out to Lot 3 after the homeowner slipped on their own flooded porch and fractured a hip. HOA emails, which Cal somehow kept getting, started to shift tone from arrogant directives to frantic internal blame. Why wasn't this caught earlier? Who approved this soil classification? We should have brought in county engineers before permitting basements. I almost felt bad. Almost. Then came the kicker, a cease and desist letter delivered to my gate via courier. Karen accused me of intentional sabotage via hydrological interference. She claimed my runoff system was a threat to public safety and demanded immediate shutdown. The irony was beyond parody. After they drained my lake, she now wanted to control the water still running legally through my land. I handed the letter straight to my attorney. "Let them try," he said, scanning it. "They have no case. But this proves one thing. They know they're losing." That same day, I got a call from Dr. Callie Wren, the geologist who'd helped me earlier. "They reached out to me," she said, sounding bemused. "Who?" I asked. "Karen Remington." She asked if I could provide a statement that the current flooding is due to residual lake moisture and soil saturation, and that it has nothing to do with drainage redirection or zoning fraud. I let out a short, humorless laugh. She offering to pay? She offered a consulting honorarium. I declined. Dr. Wren wasn't the type to play both sides, but Karen was desperate, and desperate people get sloppy. Later that evening, a neighbor from town, Jeff, who owned a fishing shop nearby, dropped by unannounced. He handed me a sealed envelope. "This came to my mailbox by mistake," he said. "It's addressed to you, but sent through the HOA box system. Figured it was important." Inside was a printed internal memo from Karen to the HOA board, dated 2 months before the drainage began. The subject line read, "Post-Drainage Vision Proposal, Silver Dunes Recreation Expansion." Attached was a plan for converting the dry lake bed into a community eco-park with athletic courts, amphitheater, and revenue-generating rental pavilions. It listed target bids, estimated cost recovery from insurance, and even projected property value increases. She didn't just want to protect homes from flood risk. She wanted to turn a drained lake into a profit center. It was corporate colonization of land, of nature, of history. That night, I scanned everything. I updated the case file. I sent the new documents to both my attorney and the state investigators. And then I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I stood on the dry edge of what once was Stanton Lake, and I turned the old north crank. The flow was slow, but it moved. And the swamp below Silver Dunes deepened. The courtroom was packed. Press, state officials, even locals from Jackson and nearby counties had shown up. Some out of curiosity, some out of anger, and a few because they remembered my father and the lake he'd built with his bare hands. Karen Remington sat 3 rows ahead of me, dressed in a charcoal suit, far too sharp for someone about to get publicly unmasked. Her lawyer kept whispering, but she stared straight ahead, jaw locked, hands tight, face pale. The judge entered. The clerk read the case title, Grayson Stanton versus the HOA of Silver Dunes, and Karen Remington in her capacity as president and private citizen. My attorney, Mark Delaney, opened clean. He presented a timeline. Construction of the lake in 1956. Certified federal registration, maintained drainage. No incidents in 67 years. Then, 2024. Sudden accusations, unilateral interference, and irreversible environmental loss. We showed the letter from the HOA's hired expert, who turned out to be Karen's cousin. We introduced the post-drainage vision proposal memo. We displayed the internal HOA email where Karen promised a risk-free path to boost property value through controlled drainage. Then came the surveillance footage. Karen, at night, handing a sealed envelope to county official Marcellus Denton in the driveway of his private residence. The courtroom buzzed. Marcellus, subpoenaed under duress, had tried to dodge testifying until the State Ethics Committee filed a parallel investigation. Now, sitting under oath, he finally admitted, yes, she offered me $20,000 to expedite drainage approval. I didn't think it would go this far. That was it. No amount of legal maneuvering could undo that confession. Karen's team collapsed. Her defense switched to damage control. They begged for leniency, citing misunderstood community intentions and lack of technical knowledge. The judge didn't buy it. Verdict: Karen Remington guilty on charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, destruction of protected land, bribery of a county official, and malicious environmental tampering. Sentence: 12 years state prison. Marcellus Denton, convicted of corruption and abuse of office. Sentenced 6 years and $250,000 fine. HOA Silver Dunes, dissolved under court order. Assets frozen pending civil liability payouts. Insurance providers pulled coverage from 6 of the 11 homes. County inspectors declared 4 houses structurally unsound due to improper soil classification. But the final ruling, that was mine. Mr. Stanton is entitled to restitution for damages totaling $1.2 million, full restoration funding of Stanton Lake, and exclusive water and land management rights moving forward. The press wrote about it for weeks. But what mattered most to me happened quietly 2 months later. On a crisp October morning, standing alone beside the restored shoreline, I turned the crank one final time. Water flowed in, slowly, steadily, calmly. Birdsong returned within days. Reeds regrew. The air changed, wetter, richer, alive again. I placed a new sign beside the water, carved in cedar, mounted in stone. Water belongs to the land belongs to us, and greed will drown in both.